This is
Yep.
Allison Thompson, Director at Marshall Public Library, and I am here today with Warren Strohm. Today is March 2nd, 2016, and we have been doing a series about Warren's life. I've been very impressed with his memory thus far, and we are having this interview at Marshall Public Library. So join me as we listen to more about Warren's life.
Well, good morning, Allison.
Good morning.
I am very pleased to be that you people are helping me with the putting happenings in my life on paper or on tape. Particularly my younger son Randy, he's been bugging me for quite some time to get this done, and in fact, I've got a recorder sitting up there in my desk someplace, and they bought me a whole basket full of tapes. and I haven't run out of tapes yet. Can you imagine that?
Well, I'm so glad that we're able to do it with you.
Well, it's fun. It's fun.
It is.
Yes, and I do hope that when we're finished and you maybe you or somebody else sees fit to put them in print, like has been in local Marshall paper. I just feel sure that there's going to be a few people that's going to get a laugh out of it.
Yes.
First of all, and then I had fun. I had fun putting this down on paper, make my notes. Once I got started on it, it was kind of time consuming, but I'm not too busy this day and age. And we had some days when I was very, very pleased to stay inside. So I actually today I'd like to go back clear back to the 1930s of all times, and that's quite a while ago. And of course, in 1930, I was only 2.5 years old, going on 3, I guess, and so I don't go quite that far this morning. Let's see. Well, I want to tell you some things that happened on my teenage, or not my teenage, my early life history, or what happened. Actually, we lived 8 miles. I was born and raised in a farmhouse that's a half a mile west of the little burg of Snyder down here. We always call it 8 miles from Marshall, and my father's. I may have told about this before, but he served at one term as a deputy sheriff in the 20s and early 20s, and after he ran for election for sheriff, but he was defeated by a gentleman that lived here in Marshall and was a lot older than him. My dad would only been. Well, he was born in 1892, so he would have been, he would just been in his late 20s, I guess, when he ran for sheriff. So he bought this 40-acre farm off his uncle, and it had a 2-story house on it that was well constructed and some outbuildings. And it was only about a half a mile off of Route 1, but that, a little farther, it was a dead end road that it did at one time did across Snyder Creek and junction with the road that goes straight south of the Emmanuel Church area, but anyhow. Only in the good weather did any traffic go on through past our house, so we didn't have much traffic to worry about. I was going to guess that this home structure, our home was actually maybe 10 years old or less, but it was constructed, had it had four rooms downstairs and 3 up, and they were full-size rooms. Wasn't slanted from a roof like some roof constructions are. So anyhow, I can remember a few things that happened when I was 3 to 4 or 5 years old, but they're not really worth mentioning it. The kitchen was to the rear of the structure, and it did not have the second story above it. But of course, we had no electricity. It didn't even have electricity when we moved from there in 1940, as I remember. But one thing we did have that was a little bit unique. We had a light fixture in our main living room that was fueled by unleaded gasoline. All things, yes, unleaded gasoline. It consisted of a pressure tank on the back porch that was pumped up with a hand pump, and the light fixture was a fixture that was burned just the fumes with the 2 mantlets on it, 2 or 3, and those had to be handled very carefully because the fixture, if it was jarred or moved abruptly, those mantles would fall apart. But it was certainly, but it hung on the ceiling, and it was connected to this tank out on the back porch with a copper tubing. I remember my father would pick up and unleaded gasoline in those days was readily available at the service stations that serviced fuel for cars. So the fuel was readily available, but the fixture did not burn a great quantity of fuel, and it had to be generated, or we had a torch that we would hang underneath. My folks would hang underneath that fixture and get it generated or heated somewhat, and then we'd start it out slowly and turn that pressure up after it got generated, and it was much better than kerosene lights, which was the going fixture in those days. Now they came out with a brand of lighting that was called Aladdin lamps, and they used kerosene, but as fuel. But they also had a fixture. The part of it was the mantle that burned. They burned, actually. I think they must have burned the kerosene as a vapor, and they were very good. But we didn't. I don't recall us having one of those. There's still a few of them around, and they're antiques now, of course. In the wintertime, we had one coal heating stove in what was our living room, and of course the kitchen was to the rear of the house, and it had a screen-in porch on both sides of it, which was very handy to store your muddy shoes or boots in the winter time or the spring. But those porches were very handy. Let's see. One thing I did remember that during the spring, after the spring of the year, and after the what heat was unnecessary, that big coal stove that was the main heating unit in our front room would be dismantled from the stovepipe, taken down, and that fixture would be moved out to on one of our back porches, and then, generally speaking, when you fire this big stove, it was almost impossible to fuel it with a new fuel without some of the smoke vapors escaping from it. So it was plumb normal that the housewife would want that room repapered almost every spring in order to make it clean.
I would.
And that was a procedure, but there were several people in the community that could put on paper and do a good job of it. So that was okay. The outside buildings of our farm consisted of a small brooder chicken house, had a round brooder house for chickens to be. Once we buy we didn't have a lot of chickens as I remember in the early 30s there, but the brooder house was where the chickens was brought in, and the brooder house had to be kept at least 20 or 70 to 80 degrees, or even a little warmer, while they grew to their wells. That was in the spring, and then once they got a little larger, they'd be turned outside or to an outside pen, where before they would, of course, had to go before they would become laying age or process, where they were. It was quite a bit of time would elapse. Later in my life, down there on the farm, one of the things my dad raised mostly hogs. We only had a cow or two for milk, but he raised mostly. He would farrow the piglets or buy them and feed them out till they were 200 pounds, give or take, and they were hauled to the slaughterhouse. He didn't raise a lot of his own feed, his corn, or he didn't some wheat, but he bought quite a bit of oats and wheat from the mill here in Marshall. Marshall Co-op Association had a mill here in the same spot where the 911 building is at the present time. And in fact, when my later high school, no, it was after I got out of service. I worked there in their office for those people, keeping for a short period of time. Let's go back to the farmstead. We had a fairly large barn. Was located 150 yards to the west of our house, and but it was a cattle barn. Didn't have a lot of. I don't think it had very many large doors in it, so you could pull a wagon or farm equipment, normal farm equipment that was used. But that was no great big factor because my father did not till very many acres anyhow. And when he did, had probably had one of his brother-in-laws come in and do the work. But he did have quite a, like I said, he raised a lot of hogs and sold them when they get up to 200 pound weight or more or less. One thing that I have a vivid recollection was back in. It seemed like the summer storms were a lot more intensive back in that area than they are now. They would almost, with a few exceptions or practically no, they would always generate the summer storms, lightning and so on, would generate and come out of the north and northwest, and those clouds would get so black. They would move slowly, thank goodness. They would get so black, so dark, they would be almost black coming out of the northwest. And the lightning, of course, was very severe. We always hoped they'd light up a little bit before it got to our place, but eventually it came by. My mother was home. My mother and my two sisters and I were there home on this particular day when that storm, a storm, came over the northwest, and once it got to our place, we did a lot of thunder and lightning cracked and so on and so forth. We heard one large crack, like it was striking a tree or something, just right outside of our house. Thank goodness it never did strike the house. We were in the front part of our house, and in a short period of time that storm let up a little bit, we walked out to the kitchen, or I remember I did, and we were scared as kids. We were scared, or I was, and my mother was too. I'll be darned, we looked to the west, out the area where our barn was, and lightning had struck that barn. And it was all full of flames. The whole structure was being engulfed in flames, and it burnt that structure down to just a few ashes.
Goodness.
But it, being the age I was, and so on, it was scary. I mean, real scary. Especially to realize that we were not going to be able to have that structure on our little farm to use because it was destroyed on just one big storm. Later, my father did reconstruct this building, did most of the work himself. Didn't put as large a structure in as the one that was destroyed. So it could have been worse, I guess. I would like to now talk about the eras of the 30s when I was 6'8", going on 10 years old. The two cash crops in that era for farmers were corn and wheat. There was no soybeans as a grain crop as such, not in this part of Illinois. Wheat harvest was quite an operation, and I don't remember how it started, but for some reason, my father bought a big cake from the Prevost Motor Company, and I handled J.I. Case equipment here in Marshall. He bought a big thrashing machine and a big gasoline-powered engine to pull that to power that thrashing machine, and he ran a thrashing route down on the sand prairie, which was east of Warner Prairie, at the little burg of Warner Prairie, on Route 1, State Route 1, and the way the wheat harvest took place. First way, the farmers had a grain binder, which they cut the wheat, standing wheat, when it got ripe, and this binder would bind the straws and wheat up, with a binder twine, and then the laborers would stack those in shocks. They would they put maybe 3 or 4 circular layers of this grain with the butts down, of course, and to and then when that shock was completed, they would put some of those bundles crossways in order to make a roof for it. And of course those and after about at least probably 2 weeks or more, that grain dried at a normal operation, and then it was ready to be thrashed. Well, my dad had a brother that was a fairly good-sized farmer in those times. His name was Perry. My uncle Perry Strohm lived east of Walter Prairie on that sand down there, and also my mother's oldest brother, Aaron Schaefer, farmed in that area, and both of them had raised a lot of wheat and plus their corn. Well, I think it was probably about in 1929. In fact, my father was a great storyteller, and in the 20s, the farm economy or general economy in the early 20s, clear up to about 1930, was fairly good. Fairly good time of this century, where the farmers made some money, and so but I can just remember after about in the 30s, the early 30s, President Hoover was elected, I think, in 28, and he wasn't in the office, the White House, very many months until the economy went down. And the times were really got tough, and President Hoover took the blame for all that. But it really wasn't all his fault, I don't think. But he got the blame for it in the household conversations, which we try. Our parents would hash these things over with their fellow farmers and residents in the area, and but anyhow, my father bought a brand new case thrashing rig. It was a big one for its time. It had they measured it. They rated those by the width of the thrashing cylinder, which beat the grain out of the wheat straw, and then it would try to move the straw on back to what they called the separator. But the cylinder on that thrashing machine was 36 inches wide, and the straw walkers in the back part of it was 54, and it stood a good 12 feet in the air, I would say, and to the rear, of course, it had a blower and a movable pipe where the straw was blowed out of the machine once the wheat was extracted, and that straw discharge part of the equipment would rotate from side to side and to make a straw stack. Which was later baled. Most of it was baled or was used for wintertime bedding for animals. But and that was quite an operation. The thrashing wheat was. I'm going to say that the wheat thrashing run, I'm going to call it, down there on that Sand Prairie, would take between 2 and 3 weeks before they would be done. Was my dad not only farmed for his brother and brother-in-law, but there were several other farmers down there in that area, and their wheat would, of course, their wheat and that on that high sand down there would ripen 2 to 3 weeks before the crop on the clay. So thrashing operation was a community operation there because you had to have farm help to haul these bundles in with a wagon and horses, of course, and this thrashing machine was powered by a big case engine that was on steel wheels, and I'm going to say that the rear wheels on that tractor was a good 5 feet tall and almost 2 feet wide, and had this straight angled iron lugs on them, and it would move from one location to the other at the great speed of about 2 miles an hour. But of course, that was fairly. I guess it wasn't made to race; it was made to thrash. And then the power from that tractor, it had of all things, it had an engine that was set crossways on that frame, and had a big flywheel on one side and a belt pulley on the other side. Well, a big wide belt, which was long enough so that engine could set, I'm going to say 100 to 150 feet from the thrash machine. It was connected by a big wide belt that I'm going to say was at least 10 inches wide, and powered the thrash machine, and the wheat. The loads of bundles was hauled in by on flatbeds, and this machine was big enough to have a load of bundles on each side of it, mm-hmm. And that chore was by a strong gentleman, people. They would throw these bundles into the thrash machine it's very important that they put the bundles on the front of the auger, that put them with the hedge front first, so that when they went in there to the ciller, they would extract the grain. Mm-hmm. And that was quite an operation for me when I was just a kid to watch, but I wasn't big enough to help my dad. And then, of course, unfortunately, about the time in the late 30s, the late 30s was when the self-propelled combines came in, and of course that thrash machine era was a thing of the past. But it was then, in fact, the crew was so large, the number of men that was helping with that thrashing operation was so, they would be, I'm going to say, 35 men, and the women would all gather to prepare a thrashing dinner, and they wouldn't have enough facilities in the farmhouse to seat all those men at one time, so they would seat half of them at the dining room table and feed them, and then the second crew would come in and eat. Of course, the men that was involved in the early crew got to eat. They would go out and hitch our horses up again and go out to the field and get them load of bundles.
And how many acres was this? Was this the 40 acres?
Well, there was it varied a lot, but I'm going to say I'm going to guess that both of my uncles would probably farm, probably have at least 35 to 40 acres. Mm-hmm. wheat, and most of their grain they would salvage some for feeding livestock probably. I mean, save some of them in a bin, but most of it was hauled to grain elevators that time, and there was a pretty good sized grain elevator at Walnut Prairie, which disappeared several years later. I mean, it fell in disrepair and it burned. And then there was a grain elevator in West Union, and of course, I guess maybe it says, the best of my remember, it had a longer life. It survived. It was in business clear up through the 40s for oats and wheat and some corn. Excuse me. But that was quite a process for a threshing crew. And then not only did my father run his thresh machine on a run down there on that sand, but then when they finished down there, he'd fire up that engine and head up towards Ernest area, which was where my other uncle, my Uncle Dan Shaver, lived, and he farmed quite a bit. Well, not today's acreage, of course, but size farm. But he had wheat, and some of his neighbors also had the Blockerners. Several of them, Blockner boys farmed. Several of them was involved in the operations of wheat threshing. They would do a threshing run up there that last probably 2-3 weeks. So it was that was in, I'm going to say in July and the first part of August when that would happen. Of course, and I wasn't big enough to actually work at it, but I could tag along, and it was quite an operation in those days, and of course my dad always said about the time. Let's see, I would have been 37. I would have been 10 years old, and 39 would have been 12, or maybe I was old enough to help somewhat. But then the self-propelled combine came in existence long about that time, and the thresh machines disappeared. My dad held on to that tractor, that big old cast iron tractor, and the thresh machine. During my high school years, which started in 1940 and into 45, I don't know exactly where he had. I think maybe where he had this stored, but along about that time, my dad also bought a farm just north of Marshall. That was right in the area of what we called the old 4 Mile Drive, and I will never will forget when I was in high school. I went out there to that farm one evening, and my dad was kind of down in the dumps. He was really, really depressed in a way, because that day he had sold that old, big old cast iron tractor for a total for scrap for $20. Oh. And if he of course knew what was going to happen down the road, if he would have kept that as an antique, not too many more years, it would have been worth a lot of $20 dollar bills. But for some reason, he sold it for junk. When I was that, and he had a bad day at that time. But I guess that was all part of it. One of the other things that happened long about that time that could have been really disastrous for me, but I had one thing I wanted to talk about was the water boy that holds the water, drinking water to these farmers. That when they were doing this thrashing and picking up, well, and also they would have men out in the field that would help was work. They was on the ground, and they would throw these bundles up on these wagons, and of course it was summertime, and they needed their water jugs filled pretty often. Well, excuse me. There was no such thing as insulated plastic coolers in those days. But there was water jugs. They would have been a clay material. But they were only hold about a gallon, 2 gallons maybe. But they would take the water boy would fill these jugs right out of the well, out of the pump, and the water, of course, would be cool. And then they would wrap a burlap around those, wet that covering, and of course as it evaporated, as the water evaporated, it would create a cooling effect and keep that water a little bit cooler. And quite often this was hauled by just with one horse and a saddle, and they would hang these water jugs on both sides of the horse over the saddle. One thing that I vividly remember that happened was that I was attempting to help the water, or I thought I was helping the water boy on the one of the runs down there at a particular farm, and that farm had a pretty good sized barn. That farm had a big barn, and the water well was out close to the barn, at the barn lot. But instead of having a horse using a horse to haul the water out to the fields, there was an old pickup truck there on that farm that belonged to the farmer, and one of the neighbor boys was 2-3 years old. I'm going to guess I was about, maybe 8 years old. And of course I was there I'd come out there that morning with my dad, and I was trying to help a little bit, be some assistant. I helped him fill the jugs at the well, and we loaded them up in that truck. And instead of me getting up in the cab, I thought it'd be fun I'd ride in the back of that pickup truck in his bed, and I would just sit on the clear at the back, where if I remember right, that old pickup had a gate on it that folded down. The gate dropped down. They had the hinge that run across to horizontally. So we was ready to go to the field, and I told this driver that I would just ride in the back. That'd be more fun. And I just let my feet dangle down. Well, in order for him to get through the fence, through the gates or something, he put that pickup in reverse and gave it some gas, and it was going backwards at a pretty fast speed, and he backed into the barn. Oh. And with my feet, and we hit the barn side of that barn with my feet was dangling down, sitting out the back. The only thing that saved me was that the truck was at an angle, only one corner to an angle to the side of the barn, and one corner of that truck hit the barn doors there before the other side did, or my feet. I got some bruises out of it, but if it hadn't happened the way it did, that truck was setting and backing at an angle. I could have lost my legs very easy, or severely damaged them. Might have lost a foot, or I would have been severely handicapped for the rest of my life. But the good Lord was with me, apparently, and I just had to get a few bruises out of that. But
That's something you remember.
I can remember that very distinctly. Of course, when we when I seen my dad, I told him about it, and he was a little bit unhappy with the truck driver. Quite naturally, well, the truck driver was he was very much put out with himself because that had happened. This man, I forget, I had his name. This young fellow was actually the waterman. I had his name right on the tip of my tongue, but I'm not going to accuse anybody because I don't want that to be on the record, because it was strictly what it wasn't his. It was his fault, but it wasn't his fault, and it could have been true. It could have been a crooked lassie, no question about that. So anyhow, what do my notes say here? I got a little ahead of myself here. I'm on my second page, I guess. Some of the farmers that my dad thrashed wheat for was Frank Bubeck's dad was named Balzer Bubeck. He farmed a lot of acres. There was a smaller farmer there named Fred Letterman. He was a smaller operator, but he's still good. Still a fine gentleman. There's another man by the name of Harry Ogle, and he had a son that lived with him that was somewhat had a disability, maybe mental or physical and mental disability, but he was a good worker anyhow. Mr. Ogle's son. So I wanted to mention those gentlemen's names because I remember them very. The one thing that my father did, he also had a farm truck in those days with dual wheels on the back, that he would back that thing alongside that thrash machine, and as the grain come out of the thrasher, it would run right in augered right into that truck, and they had some wagons and maybe another truck or two, and since they wasn't too far from the elevators at Walnut Prairie or West Union, once they got the truck unloaded, they'd go and load that and hurry back to keep the whole operation moving. And there, of course, there was no, like I said, soybeans were more as a crop or non-existent in the area, Clark County here in those days. And so the corn was the biggest crop, but wheat was a very, very sizable acres also, and was a good cash crop if the weather would cooperate and give the enough moisture to grow a good crop. Wheat was a good crop, let's see, what else I got here? You know, I believe I'm about going to run down for this today, Allison.
Well, thank you for taking the time to write out your thoughts and memories. It certainly will be very meaningful for us to listen to in the future. So thank you once again for coming here today to the library, and we will have another interview.
I apologize for my presentation today. It wasn't quite as smooth as I was wanting it to be.
You were great.
But
I've learned some things.
It's my pleasure to recall all these happenings, and like I said, mostly it was fun, and the only thing that wasn't fun was when I got my knees banged up.
Yes.
But that could have been a lot worse.
Yes, it could have.
And hopefully, if you want me to, I'll come back again in a few days, and
Sounds good.
and we'll chit chat some more.
Sounds great. Thanks, Warren.
Well, thank you. Bye.